Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. Thank you for being here. This is Stay Ahead of Cyber AI Attacks with Continuous AI Pen Testing, a practitioner's guide. We're glad to have you. We'll give it just a few moments for folks to join, and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone. Hello from Boston, Virginia, Romania, Sarajevo, Florida. Wow, quite the crowd here. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We are going to get started. I'll hand over things now to Dan Padnos, who will be moderating today's conversation. Dan, over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this special session. So this is a session for security leaders and security teams. We're trying to figure out how testing needs to change as both software delivery and attackers are moving faster with AI. My name is Dan. I'm head of AI at Novee. I have a background in training and building products on top of LLMs. So I've been building on the frontier of AI for the past something like 8 years. And in my current role at Novee, I lead our proprietary model training. But my role for today is moderator. We have three amazing panelists who each see this topic that we're talking about today from a different angle. We have an analyst, a founder, and a practitioner. And we're going to dig into some very interesting stuff. We'll hear from the research side the latest numbers on why and how traditional pen testing is falling further behind the pace of software releases, and what that means as we look ahead into an increasingly AI-driven world. We'll hear the practitioner side, how organizations are moving from annual pen tests to continuous, always-on validation, and what that changes from the inside. We'll spend a while on economics. We'll talk about how defending with frontier models, the same ones that attackers might use, isn't necessarily sustainable, and what an actual cost-effective model would look like. And perhaps most exciting, we'll also talk about where all of this is heading. So what will we be looking back in a year and saying has changed in offensive security, what was obvious and what was surprising? So in terms of the agenda, we'll start with a few minutes from Geffen, co-founder and CEO of Novee. Ido will give us an introduction on why Novee exists and what continuous AI-driven validation actually means. Then we'll hear from Katie Norton. Katie is a senior analyst at IDC, and we have the opportunity to hear hot off the press research on the widening gap between the cadence of software release and security testing, and how that's opening up even faster with AI. And from there, we'll move on into the centerpiece of today's webinar, which is the fireside chat. We'll bring in Scott Roberts, perhaps the bona fide expert of bona fide experts. Scott is CISO and SVP at UiPath, the world's leading business orchestration and automation platform, and also a Novee customer. Previously, Scott owned security at Microsoft, AWS, Google, and Coinbase. You've probably heard of these companies. Scott played a foundational role in a number of major industry programs, things like Patch Tuesday, threat modeling, and Scott was also one of the people behind the CVSS scoring standard, which many of us, if not all of us, probably use today. He's also a founding member of the AIUC1 consortium, which I hope we'll have a chance to talk about a little later. And in addition to being an active investor and advisor, Scott was also named 2025 Global CISO of the Year by Pacific Northwest CISO. So we're really glad to have you with us for this conversation. And with our plan and introductions out of the way, I'd like to hand it off to Ido. Ido Geffen is, as I said, co-founder and CEO of Novee. And in the last several years, he's been building toward exactly the problem we're talking about. So Ido, please, the 3-minute version. Why does Novee exist? And how do you think about the world we're at right now in terms of offensive security?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Dan. So at Novee, we've built the best AI hacker that is also the best AI defender. We understand that hackers were always a problem, and hackers are trying to break from the external into the applications of organizations and then being able to find their way into the infrastructure and accelerate, manipulate, or encrypt the sensitive data that organizations are holding. But hackers today are leveraging AI and generating cyber attacks that are much more sophisticated, faster, and in a scale that we've never witnessed before. And in parallel, we are seeing much more applications that are being developed by AI assistant tools and vibe coding apps. And the result is that the attack surface that's supporting all of this infrastructure of all of those applications is also growing in exponential way. So basically, we have two trends that are coming together and gives a very unfair advantage to the hackers. And this is exactly what we are trying to build and fight at Novee. So if you look on modern organization and how we are trying to protect, so there are two main philosophies today, right? This is the hacking side on the left, see what is truly exploitable. And on the defense side is how to defend based on multiple layers of protection. So if we will start on the hack side, so organizations until very lately needed to choose between two bad options. Automatic scanner that works in continuous way, but really lack any intuition and provide very shallow insights, or manual penetration testing, which can provide novel insights sometimes, but it's really just point in time. And as time progressed, we are now seeing more and more AI penetration testing tools that are utilizing the state-of-the-art LLMs like Mythos of Anthropic, and trying to build something that is deep and continuous. And when it comes to the Novee Red Team side of the aisle, we have taken the scientific approach by creating the Novee Gym, which is where we are training our own proprietary model and optimizing the AI agents that we are utilizing in order to provide the best recall, precision, and predictable cost when it comes to offensive security. So this is how we're building the best AI hacker in the world and being able to scale into big enterprises like UiPath. But on the other side, we do understand that it's not enough just to be on the hacking side. And we understood from the get-go that if we hack on your behalf, learn the specific technological stack that the organization have, we can tailor the specific defense mechanism as quickly as possible. So if you look on the right side, on the defense side, organizations can choose between risk posture, prevention, and detections. This is the three options that they can choose today. And the Novee Blue Team is trying to optimize the three of those. So when it comes to risk posture, we are validating vulnerabilities that are truly exploitable and guiding on how to mitigate and remediating those. On the prevention side, on how to harden the attack surface, for example, finding areas without MFA that is not being enforced, or helping with better segmentation. And on the detection side, we can help in simulating modern AI-driven attacks and helping validate if the current tools and processes can detect and react as soon as possible. So to finalize it, Novee is the first offensive security platform that can hack on your behalf and protect you from modern AI-driven cyber threats, and this way being one step before the attackers can act. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Ido. So that tells us why Novee exists and sort of gives us some grounding on why we're having this conversation today. I want to bring in the broader context on why this and why now from outside our vendor lens. So that's why we have Katie Norton with us. Katie is a senior analyst at IDC covering DevSecOps and application security. And her research brings market and category framing on where application security testing is headed. And recently, Katie, you led IDC research into how organizations are adapting security testing to this new reality. And I think we're all very curious to hear what the data is showing. So Katie, please take it away.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for the great introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. And, you know, at IDC, a lot of my research looks at how security practices have evolved and the way organizations build and release software and how that changes. So over the next few minutes, I want to focus on three things. First, we're going to talk about the growing cadence gap between how frequently applications change and how frequently they are penetration tested. Second, I'm going to look at how AI agents are beginning to make that penetration testing more adaptive and continuous. And finally, I'll talk about my IDC Innovators Report, which actually just published today, and what we looked at for this emerging market and some of the capabilities highlighted throughout the research. Next slide, please. So the starting point for all of my research in this area was a fairly clear cadence problem. As you can see in the chart on the left, IDC data shows that around 76% of organizations conduct penetration testing using an external team twice a year or less often than that. That includes more than 11% that never even use an external team. And only about 5.5% are conducting external penetration tests monthly or more frequently. On the right, you see the software delivery cadence looks very different. More than 73% of organizations deploy code to production weekly or more frequently, and nearly 40% are releasing daily or multiple times a day. You know, and that doesn't mean that periodic penetration tests aren't valuable. You know, a really skilled penetration tester can provide a very deep and rigorous assessment of an application at a particular point in time. But the challenge is how long that assessment continues to represent the application that's actually running. When an application changes weekly, daily, or several times within a day, the environment tested, during a scheduled engagement, that could be materially different from what's in the environment in production a few weeks later. And that gap existed before generative AI, but AI-assisted development is placing additional pressure on that. Next slide, please. AI is adding to this pressure, right? Organizations are clearly aware of that issue. In IDC's research on AI and agentic AI in the software development lifecycle, nearly 62% of respondents said that they were at least moderately concerned about the security risks associated with agentic AI tools in their development workflows. Almost 1 in 4 were very or extremely concerned. And, you know, this reflects that combination of greater velocity, higher volumes of change, and increasing autonomy. As agents take on more development activities, organizations, they're going to have more code and more application changes moving through that already fast-moving cycle with less direct human involvement in every decision. So security testing, therefore, it has to account for not only the vulnerabilities that AI may possibly introduce, but it also has to account for that pace and scale at which the application itself can now change. Next slide, please. The investment data I wanted to show just really reinforces that point. As you can see here, when we talk about where organizations are investing around their application security tools, testing and automated testing remains the most frequently cited investment priority in DevSecOps programs. And you can see penetration testing ranks much lower. And I think that is a reflection of that automation. And I believe that, now AI in security workflows is going to help kind of close that gap between those two areas. Dynamic testing, for example, has always provided that continuous automated testing that tries to simulate what an offensive tester can do. It'll run those predefined payloads against a live application. But human penetration testers bring a different capability there. They interpret how the application behaves. They can examine roles, the authentication flows, business logic in ways that traditional DAST tools struggle with. But with AI now in the pictures and agents, what is really changing is some of that more adaptive, reasoning-driven testing that can now be delivered at the pace and through software and AI agents. Those agents can map applications, develop testing hypotheses, and interact with a running environment, and adjust their approach in a way a human might based on what they observe. And so that really creates this potential to bring together that analytical depth associated with human penetration testing into a more continuous operating model. Next slide. So before getting into Novee, and generally, I like to let the vendor speak about their capabilities themselves. I did want to note, first explain briefly what an IDC Innovators Report is. These reports focus on emerging companies. They're not rankings or, intended to provide an exhaustive list of every vendor participating in an area. But what I tried to do is look for emerging, growing companies with technology that, addresses a really meaningful problem and demonstrates some innovation in its technology or its business model. And so I had selected Novee as an IDC innovator around autonomous penetration testing for DevSecOps. And in the report highlight, three things that I felt were differentiated about its approach. First, I felt that the way that it embeds offensive security into a proprietary AI model, supporting, with a supporting knowledge layer and a testing harness, while also using, those frontier models where appropriate. This emphasis to me really built a system that was specifically designed for penetration testing, rather just relying on, say, a general purpose model to be able to do and deliver these capabilities. Secondly, I felt that they really take a remediation forward approach when it comes to the validation of exploits. Findings are independently validated and they're supported with evidence, and they can really help teams reproduce, the issue and also help remediate it. And then finally, in my opinion, Novee really supports testing across a broad application attack surface. As applications evolve, they're not just web apps and web pages. You've got APIs, you have mobile, you have desktop, you have now AI-enabled applications, and all of those things bring in both traditional and new modern AI-specific risks. So I thought it was great that they had such broad coverage for what they're delivering to their customers. So I'll leave, the deeper technical discussions to Ido and the team, but these are the three areas that to me captured why I selected selected Novee to be part of this IDC report. And I think ultimately these connect the thesis behind the research. The next phase of application security is going to be less focused on how many vulnerabilities a tool can find, but more at those tools that are able to apply enough reasoning to identify meaningful attack paths, safely prove that a risk is real, and provide that evidence needed to move an issue towards remediation at something that's much closer to the pace of software change. So with that, I'll hand it back to Dan, and we can, I think, dive into the chat.
Thanks, Katie. This is really eye-opening research. I mean, for me, this first slide with showing the cadence mismatch with the pen testing cadence versus the deployment cadence side by side is really striking. And I agree, it's not entirely new, but it's accelerating fast. So really interesting stuff.
Thanks.
I think this sets us up nicely for the fireside chat segment. So I want to bring Scott and Ido back in, and we'll start the conversation part. Do we have Scott with us? Because I can't see his video for some reason.
Yeah.
All right, while we figure that out, maybe we can start with a gentle intro into the conversation. And Katie, I'd like to ask you, following up on the data that you shared, what can you tell us about how fast organizations are adopting AI on both sides of this equation, on software development and on security? And are the gaps narrowing or opening up?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the clearest shifts that I am seeing in the research that I'm doing, and some of the data I showed reflects this, is that software development itself is already becoming very agentic. In some survey research we did, we found that just shy of 60% of organizations said that they're developing software using agents for activities such as code generation, testing, debugging, documentation. But security is also a significant area of activity. We saw about just shy of 40% of respondents saying that they're using agents for those tasks as well. And what I find most interesting is where organizations are generally placing their trust. They find that like testing code is one of the most trusted agent use cases, followed by writing code. Vulnerability scanning then comes in third after that. And so what this suggests to me is, security is moving in that same direction as development is. But I think there's still a little bit of a difference in maturity and trust around those things. I think organizations generally appear more comfortable using agents to like evaluate code than giving them that greater autonomy to create it. But I think that's sort of where the real exposure gap is. It's not about just AI introducing vulnerabilities through that code, but that what we talked about just a few minutes ago, that difference in that speed between how software is created and how it is tested. So kind of my core point is I think that development sort of already entered an agentic operating model. Security is not only working through how to validate that resulting code, but how to also do that with agents itself without really sacrificing that rigor and confidence organizations generally expect from security testing.
Hello there. Sorry for some technical issues. I am back. Can you hear me
Thanks.
okay?
Great. Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Thanks. Thanks, Katie. That makes sense, and it's really interesting. And I think I'd like to sort of ask the similar question for Scott. In terms of this shift and the changing threat landscape, how are CISOs thinking about the gap between the development speed and their security posture today?
Well, first, I do want to thank the group for having me here today. I really enjoy this kind of conversation, and it's really nice to be able to share kind of our experiences with others. Dan, as you mentioned earlier, we are at UiPath one of the world's leaders in business automation and orchestration. We are natively an ML and AI company and have been looking at this problem for quite a while. As a matter of fact, my security team first presented on the use of LLMs from a security perspective all the way back in Black Hat of 2024. And so we've been leaning into LLMs and coded agents for quite a while. And in terms of the acceleration on the landscape, you're absolutely right. We are seeing a velocity of PRs from our development team like never before. If you just look at it from just a lines of code point of view to the number of products that we're able to ship, We've had over 500 releases in the past 12 months, really scaling up our development velocity. And of course, that doesn't come without risks either. So, but yes, we're seeing a massive increase in velocity.
Right. And in terms of the threat side, are you seeing threats that are, from your perspective, seem genuinely new? Or is it more of the same type of threat, but moving faster?
Well, that's a kind of a dual-sided coin there. The first side of that is if you look at what our developers have been doing for dozens of years, is that they've learned over that time to not do things such as we've learned, don't roll your own crypto, don't invent your own authorization and access control schemes, don't invent novel ways to manage secrets. But yet, even though we have created mandatory rules for how coded agents should handle all of these areas, we see them often ignoring those paved roads, for example. And all of a sudden, you have a coded agent decides to invent a new way to manage secrets in your environment. And so, in some ways, as I said, on the first side of this coin, it's things that we've seen developers use, but you're able to educate and train your developer community, to use those paved roads. We see agentic agents reintroducing those same kind of issues. On the second hand, we do see coded agents, present, an increased attack surface, in the environment as well. And so understanding exactly the permissions and access controls of your agentic agents, what they're enabled to do in your environment, and what are the guardrails around them, is the other area that I look at. So those are a couple of different areas that we're seeing there.
So what does all of this do to the sort of traditional security program? And where is the new bar that we're all expected to meet moving to?
So in our environment, we have a internal set of folks focused on offensive security. We have a red team, we have internal pen testers, we have that sort of muscle built in to our environment. But yet, as things are accelerating, we didn't have tools that were able to be targeted and trained on our specific environment. In many ways, UiPath is a Swiss Army knife. We are our own development platform. We have dozens of products, and customers can put them together in novel ways. And the standard sort of off-the-shelf tools that might work great for a standard application. An application has a set, defined set of abilities, but customers can use our platform to orchestrate their business workflows and end-to-end outcomes that can actually be quite novel. So having a set of tools and capabilities that have been customized and be able to be trained on our environment is what we've really loved about the Novee relationship, is that Novee was able to come in and actually be able to understand the UiPath development platform, and then be able to help accelerate even my internal team in finding novel vulnerabilities that are provable in our environment.
So that makes me want to ask Ido, how do you see this in terms of traditional approaches hitting some sort of ceiling, and the different classes of risks that scanners and one-off testers struggle with, and maybe there's an opportunity to innovate on?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the main ceiling that we're seeing today is when it comes to speed, right? I mean, as we all said earlier, today's software is being developed much, much faster, and we need to find a way to keep with this pace. So, in organizations like UiPath, that you have a very mature security program, and you have a very strong team of penetration testers, this is where you can really create a very strong synergy between the people from UiPath team that are great penetration testers, have a very strong understanding of what is important for them and why. And then on the other hand, utilizing the AI agents in order to run much faster, much broader than a human can do. And then you have this very strong synergy. And the holy grail is the ability to really find logic, business logic vulnerabilities. This is where you really need to have the understanding of what the application really meant to do. So, for example, of business logic vulnerabilities is an HR system with a payroll model. So, whether an employee A can see the salary of employee B, if it's a flight ticket system, whether I can manipulate and order a flight in $1 instead of $600. So, those types of vulnerabilities are very, very hard to detect. Meaning, if someone like a hacker was able to exploit this type of vulnerability, all of the traditional threat detection tools are unable to detect those. So the ability, on the one hand, to work with the relevant customer and understand what is the business logic of the application, what are the crown jewels, what are the things that are really important for their business, and then running those agents with them and providing this type of intuition. I think this is the main ceiling that we are now being able to, to cross, and really being able to scale the ability to find business logic vulnerabilities, which is really something that we couldn't done until barely a month ago. I mean, a year ago, and it really changed from month from now to months.
Amazing. Yeah, the pace we're moving at is just incredible. So we have this emerging picture of transition from kind of point-in-time tests to something more continuous and sophisticated in the types of things that it can cover. We mentioned the UiPath story in brief. Scott, I'd like to ask you, can you walk us through the full story on how UiPath moved from annual pen tests to continuous validation? What drove the decision? How does Novee fit into that? And what changed with this move for your team, for your customers, for all the stakeholders involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as Katie mentioned, it is quite common for most organizations to have annual pen tests. Maybe they do them twice a year, and many of those are driven from a compliance point of view. They're mandated by various compliance regime, and in some cases, some companies treat them as a kind of a checkbox exercise, if you will. But we have, as I mentioned earlier, a really strong offensive security operation internally, and so we were already in some ways continuously testing our environment. But what this gives us is that external assurance that we have that continuous testing always happening. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing many releases per week. It was quite common, and it's accelerating. And so it gives us that additional assurance beyond our human reviewers that we haven't missed something. And as Ido mentioned earlier, it's not just scanning for vulnerabilities that out of the National Vulnerability Database, but truly understanding our platform, understanding our business logic, how customers can assemble the Lego pieces of our platform and assemble them in novel ways, and be able to run through thousands of permutations of that we simply would scale beyond what our human reviewers could do it on a regular basis. So it's really been able to scale to all these permutations and validate the findings by attempting to actually exploit them and prove to our development team where these are real issues. So it just puts that often that internal debate that your security teams often have with engineers around, was this really an issue or is it a theoretical issue, to bed, so that we can prove these issues really must be addressed.
Makes a ton of sense. Shifting gears a little bit, can we talk about sort of how that continuous pen testing happens in terms of the models powering it? So we see a lot of talk about frontier models for penetration testing. Scott, can you tell us a little bit about sort of the appetite or incentives in taking AI tools that are already used by developers and just shifting them, applying them to security?
This is actually something that's been in the news recently. If you look at the recent incident that Hugging Face had, for example, they spoke to their inability to use the foundational models or the frontier models to actually understand what's happening in their environment because of the, and in some cases, draconian guardrails that have been added to those models. And so it is very, very important that you have a custom and context-grounded capability that allows you to fully explore your environment without those limitations in place. And that's one of the things that we've pursued internally, but also with Novee's capability. We're able to have an LLM that doesn't have those kind of guardrails that would limit our environment. And so that's the first bucket on the capability point of view. And then if you look at it from a cost perspective, I have a colleague that used Mythos on a single scan of one of the repositories looking for vulnerabilities, and it cost over $25,000 in token usage just for the one scan of the one repository in their environment. And obviously that doesn't scale to being able to do that, that from a continual basis, let alone the 800 plus repositories that we have in our environment, as most large enterprises do. So being able to have something that is both doesn't have the restrictions that your frontier models have, but also is able to do it in a cost-effective way is something that we appreciate about the relationship.
I mean, wow, $25,000 for one scan is painful. I'm sure it found interesting stuff, but that's a large ticket item. So how do you weigh the cost of continuous AI-driven testing against sort of the risk it produces, and how do you make that case to yourself and to the stakeholders looking at these types of decisions?
Well, I look at this from a perspective where I want to be the one to find the issues before, for example, external security researchers find the issues. We have a very robust bug bounty program, for example, but I tend to view the things found through the bug bounty programs as opportunities for things that we could have found internally or using products such as Novee, and all of those ways that we can find those vulnerabilities, it accelerates our ability to remediate those issues faster before our bug bounty program would find them, or our unfriendly researchers were to find them and try to zero date them and create massive pain for our environment and for our customers. And so we're really on board with the idea of continuous testing and of our environment, as well as down to the agent level of security, which is why I got involved with the AIUC security standard and really wanted to make sure agent security was something that we were looking at continuously.
So speaking of AIUC, can you tell us more about that?
AIUC-1 is the first certification from the AI underwriting corporation, and it addresses a very unique gap that we feel that we saw in the industry, which is why we signed on board as co-founders for the certification. There was already a certification out there called ISO 42001, and it's an AI management system certification. So that certification, that compliance system, looks at the process that you use to build your AI agents. But the security of the AI agent itself during runtime isn't something that was covered by any particular compliance system or testing suite. And as we all know, AI agents can hallucinate. They can have a number of different types of attacks performed against them. If you look at the OWASP AI top 10, if you look at the NIST AI standard, the EUI AI standard, there's the threat models, classic threat models, really were struggling to define these AI attacks from jailbreaks through prompts, from data extraction, data poisoning. There's all kinds of attacks that can happen against AI agents. And so the AIUC-1 certification is a suite of thousands of offensive security prompts that you can throw at your AI agents and prove to the industry and to your customers that your agents are safe and secure against a broad range of these attacks. And the neat part about AIUC-1 certification is that unlike other certifications, which are annual certifications, this is a continual certification. It's continuing to evolve as the state of AI changes, doing updated test suite and test harness, and it requires quarterly offensive security, quarterly pen testing of your AI agents and recertification of them. And so it works really, really well with the cadence that Novee is going after in terms of continuous validation, continuous testing of environments, and we're looking forward to bringing these two things together.
One of the topics that I had an opportunity to work on as a researcher is actually adversarial testing of AI models. And it used to be something that was only interesting sort of in the lab. And it's really cool to see how it translates into real practical security standards with AIUC-1. So really amazing stuff. Ido, this brings us to really things that are at the core of kind of Novee's mission and what we're building. And I'm curious about your perspective on running offensive security on frontier LLMs economically. I mean, is it economically sustainable at enterprise scale? And how do you see the opportunity of bringing in a purpose-built model into the mix?
Yeah, sure. So I'm really echoing what Scott just was saying, because I truly agree that frontier LLMs like Mythos is not economically sustainable in enterprise scale. So one is the cost perspective, right? How much it is expensive. The very strong guardrails. So again, as Scott mentioned, that many times we can have just from Hugging Face just lately, right? That the security team wasn't able to really do a full investigation because of those guardrails. And also many of those, like Project Glasswing, doesn't provide Mythos and access to a very limited amount of organizations. And also you can really, it's really hard to track and understand which model is best for which task. So it is also something that maybe someone willing to pay a lot of money, but still doesn't know that it doesn't utilizing the right model for the right task. And it's not only the model, right? I mean, the biggest thing is the full system with the harness, keeping the context from the past, the history, feedback loop that we are getting on understanding what is really important, what was categorized as false positive, what is not applicable for this specific application or organization. So all of the above really made us to take a very unique approach, the scientific approach, to build our own proprietary model and really owning the full offensive security AI stack from the model through the harness. And this is where we build something pretty novel that, as you know, Dan, you're leading it, which is the Novee Gene, where we are continuously optimizing every layer in order to basically monitor the recall, the precision, and the cost entirely. And what we're seeing that the system and the results that we can provide is really improving and becoming more with better quality, but also much more cost effective, and then being able to support the need for continuous testing.
Right. Maybe one thing I have to add to that is that this Hugging Face breach story that you guys referred to is just remarkable in the sense that it's AI in sort of every bullet point in the story, right? Hugging Face is an AI infrastructure company. They got attacked by an autonomous agentic attacker. Then they had LLM-based monitoring that raised the alarm initially. And then when they were trying to do the forensics, frontier models refused, with open weights models saving the day. So really a remarkable story that shows this new reality. Katie, I'd like to ask you, this talk of a cost squeeze. Are enterprises starting to feel it in terms of AI workloads and security? And how should buyers be thinking about costs and outcomes in this area?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I expect cost pressure to become much more visible as security agents move from sort of an occasional assistance to this like persistent execution that we're going towards. And, I think the thing to consider is that traditional security software has generally been priced around relatively familiar or predictable units like users or assets or applications, right? But agentic systems introduce a different set of variables. And you've got things like how many times you're calling the model, the number of tokens, agent runs, those kinds of things. And that can make the economics of these type of tools difficult to predict, right? A pilot might look inexpensive when an agent's used periodically, but the cost profile can change when things are running continuously across hundreds and thousands of applications. So for that reason, the way I advise buyers and users of this technology to think about it is less about, how much an AI capability they're receiving is, and instead think about what that consumption is actually producing. So in offensive security, that could mean looking at like the cost for validated finding, or measuring how much manual validation work was eliminated, or how quickly a confirmed issue reaches the right team, or how much time's reduced between proving exploitability and verifying that the remediation worked. So buyers, they need to understand the units they're being charged for, have clear visibility into usage, and should also work with and look for vendors that are helping them explain these costs and why they are what they are. So ultimately, I think the strongest economics, it's not going to come from which vendor can use like the cheapest model, right? There's this balance in security where we have to look for platforms that are able to apply this maybe more expensive reasoning selectively, avoid wasting compute on lower value activity, and really show a measurable security outcome. That's the bottom line I see across all my research, is organizations want outcomes and they want to be able to measure them.
Right. So it's not about token maxing, it's about measurable outcomes.
Definitely.
All right, so we covered a lot in this fireside chat. We want to leave time for audience Q&A, which we'll do right now. So I'd like to thank our speakers and invite the audience to send your questions now. And before we transition to the Q&A, I'd just like to mention that Black Hat is coming up. If you're curious about the Novee Gym, how that works, what that helps us build, we'll be happy to see you at our booth, where you can meet our team. I'll be there, Ido will be there, everybody will be there. It'll be fun. So moving on to audience Q&A. All right, we have first question coming up. This is probably best addressed to Scott, but feel free, everybody, to chime in. We have a question from Brenda. What's a mistake you commonly see security teams make when they first move toward continuous validation?
I think trying to take your existing processes and your existing tool sets and just do them more often. I think probably would be the first thing that I would suggest, would be a common foot gun, if you will, for teams. I think to the cost point, all of a sudden, you're driving costs maybe in unexpected ways, or exceeding budgets maybe in ways that you hadn't, expected. And then the tooling itself, what we have found is can be very, very wasteful in tokens if you're trying to use, traditional foundational models, and then security features, of those models. If you haven't properly context grounded the agents with the knowledge of the environment, the standard guardrails that you should be using, here are all the existing issues that you've had in that code base and the lessons that you've learned from that code base. And so, as teams are making the move to sort of agentic SDLC, it's trying to make sure that you have that context grounding to be has been a common foot gun. And then the number one thing is some of the basics. So in the AIUC white paper, we talked about 3 key things that I would recommend that folks take a look at. There, we didn't really get time to cover it too much in the chat, but it's going to be, the patch cycle is moving from weeks to days to hours in some cases. And so looking at some of just the foundations in your environment and moving at, defending at machine speed is kind of one of the catchphrases that we're using, and looking at how to accelerate all of the sort of standard foundational things that you do in environments such as patching would be, an area that I'd recommend focusing on as well.
I'll chime in quickly here too, in covering DevSecOps for years, right? If you're finding things faster and finding more things, if you're not, even if they're validated, right? If you're not thinking about how that impacts your developers and the folks that are actually going to have to fix the findings, or looking for either tools or your own internal processes on what you actually do with, what these tools are finding, you're just creating a bigger backlog, which is already an existing problem for most organizations. So I think it's really, these teams historically, I still think we struggle with DevSecOps and security and developers working together. So if you're continuously validating security issues, but not also thinking about how they're continuously remediated as well in your organization, you're going to create more problems than solutions.
And just to kind of plus one, Katie's point there, we have looked at a number of ways to increase our remediation speed, so that we're not handing our developers just vulnerabilities to go fix, but we're actually part of the remediation process. And we have a number of products that help us create proposed PRs for our development team now, as well as products that are using what we call safe images, where the CVEs have already been addressed in that base image, and we can provide the updated base image to our development team. So we move them out of the having to cherry pick a CVE fix model altogether. And so I'm happy to chat more about those as well.
The development teams must appreciate this idea of safe images. It's a huge headache that gets removed from their agenda.
Well, I always tell people, try to be part of the solution, not just creating problems for your developers, right?
Right. We have an interesting question coming in here in the chat on the role of human pen testers in 5 years. Once this continuous AI validation revolution is sort of standard. I guess this is a question for everybody.
I mean, I can say analysts, we always are expected to predict things. And personally, I don't think humans in any role, developers, pen testers, go away. I think in all jobs, it's just what your responsibility is in the tool that you're using is what changes. I've spoken with a number of penetration testers that they themselves are leveraging these tools, and I think there is that a need for those point in time, more in depth, focused efforts that AI and human ability are certainly closing in on each other, but there's always that human judgment factor that remains to be seen if that will be met with AI. But I just think that it's just I don't think continuous validation negates the existence of a human penetration tester.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree. Yeah, sorry, Scott. Go on.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Katie. I mean, I do think that and it's not only true for penetration testing, it's also true for development, etc. If you look on the amount of developers in highly scaled organizations, that they're hiring more developers. So I also think that for trained penetration testers, the role will become just more and more important, right? I mean, their ability to really operate and manage this in a very high scale becomes a much higher degree of challenge, and how to understand from all of the noise what is truly exploitable, what is really validated, how to prioritize correctly. I think that all of those things are really the combination of really trained penetration tester and the best AI penetration testing tool can really provide 10x and what we've seen until today.
I was going to plus one that on our developer side, for example, we are in many ways they are moving to orchestrating coded agents, and I see that analog happening on my pen testing team as well, right? I do not see necessarily having smaller numbers of those folks. What I see them be able to do is use the capabilities and the tools like Novee to have a much broader impact than they were able to before. They have very limited bandwidth and could look at a very targeted set of attack targets that now can scale much larger through the use of capabilities like this.
Thanks, all. There's an interesting question here from Josh on Novee specifically, actually. How often does it find or chain or exploit custom code issues like SQL injection and other things versus just known CVEs in operating systems and libraries? Ido, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I mean, I think that CVEs are here to stay, right? They're also growing very dramatically, and the ability to understand what is really exploitable and how it can be exploited is not less important. But we are seeing more and more importance that is getting not less important in this case of really being able to find those business logic or very application-specific vulnerabilities like IDO, SQL injection. So again, it's the mix of those. It combines that both things are really important, and how quickly you can mitigate or remediate those, and also finally, this is the real question on how you can really be one step before the bad guys.
All right. So I'd like to thank the audience for interesting and thought-provoking questions, and to thank our speakers for giving us really unique perspectives and sharing their expertise. So thank you, Scott, Katie, and Ido. This was really a pleasure. I think we had a really interesting 60 minutes. I will see everybody at Black Hat, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It was an honor to be part of it. And thank you for leading it, Dan.
Yeah, thank
Likewise,
you.
it was a great chat.